In today's video, I'll be discussing 8 ETFs that you might consider holding onto for the long term, at least until you're retired and relaxing on the beach with a piña colada. These ETFs are expected to perform well in their respective areas for the next couple of decades or so. Quick reminder, an ETF is like a bunch of stocks bundled together that follows a specific index or investment strategy. It's a bit like a mutual fund but with a key difference. You can buy and sell ETFs on various stock exchanges or brokerages, no matter who's offering them. In contrast, mutual funds are typically tied to a specific broker, like Vanguard or Fidelity, which is why many 401ks offer only their own mutual funds. That's how they make their profits. Big shout out to Seeking Alpha for sponsoring our video and its analytics. Make sure to get your 14-day free trial of Seeking Alpha Premium via the link in the description. You can only get the 14-day trial through the link below, so make sure to check them out, guys. Also, if you guys sign up, the commission will help us stay alive, the channel that is. Alright, let's get back to it. Let's kick things off by diving into the first ETF on our list, the Invesco S&P 500 Equal Weight ETF, also known as RSP. This ETF is quite interesting because it includes more than 500 stocks that aim to mirror the S&P 500 index. The unique aspect of this ETF is that it follows an equal weight approach, which means no single company has a disproportionately large influence on the fund. They adjust the holdings every quarter to maintain this balance, which is meant to maximize diversification and reduce risk by not putting all your investment in one place. Now, most ETFs are heavily influenced by one or two big companies. For instance, many have Apple as a major holding, sometimes making up over 10% of the entire fund. While I'm a fan of Apple, relying heavily on it can be risky. If it takes a hit, it could hurt a lot of retirement accounts. In terms of financial details, over the past year, it's grown by a little over 13%, while the 5-year performance is around 10%, and the 10-year performance is a bit over 11%. A great thing about this ETF is its low expense ratio of only 0.2%. For every $10,000 invested, you're only paying $20 in fees. Now let's dive into the second ETF on our list, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. This ETF gives you a piece of the entire stock market pie, with over 3,500 companies from various sectors included. Think of it like a big pot of soup with all kinds of ingredients. This ETF includes large, mid, and small-sized companies, as well as both value and growth companies. It's designed to provide you with a wide-ranging exposure to the American market, which helps spread out the risk. Despite having so many companies, the tech sector is pretty big in this ETF. Then you've got consumer discretionary, healthcare, and industrial sectors also playing a significant role. The top company is Apple, but it's not hogging more than 10% of the fund's makeup. When it comes to numbers, VTI is currently trading at $218.09, and it's gained about 16.18% year-to-date. Over the past year, it's grown by a little over 18%, while the 5-year performance is around 11.3%, and the 10-year performance is just over 12%. Now, hold on to your seat, the expense ratio here is an incredibly low 0.03%, which means for every $10,000 you invest, you're only paying $3 in fees. Alright, let's dive into the third ETF on our list, the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. This one's a bit special because it's all about those dividends, you know. That extra income companies pay out to their shareholders. What's cool about this ETF is that it's picky about who gets in. It uses a bunch of important factors, like cash flow, debt ratio, and dividend yield, to make sure the companies inside are strong and not just throwing out dividends for show. SCHD focuses on companies that have been consistently paying dividends for a solid 10 years. No shaky businesses here. They're mostly big companies, and they stay away from REITs to keep things simple. But they don't put all their eggs in one basket, they cap the amount they invest in a single company and in a sector, so things stay balanced. When you look at the types of companies in there, you'll see a bunch from health tech, finance, and things like everyday products. Now, numbers time. As of today, SCHD is trading at around $72.38. It's had a bit of a bumpy ride lately, with a negative 3.24% year-to-date, but the 1-year performance is at 2.48%, the 5-year at 11.24%, and the 10-year is a bit over 11%. And hey, here's some good news, the expense ratio is really low at 0.06%, which means for every $10,000 you put in, you're only giving away $6 in fees. That's like buying a fancy coffee. This ETF also pays out dividends, and right now, that's around 3.58%. Just remember, the total return numbers assume you reinvest those dividends. If you want, you can take them as cash, but remember, you'll have to pay taxes on those dividends. So, what's the bottom line? This ETF is all about dividends, with strong companies, low fees, and a solid track record. If you're into that extra income from your investments, this one's worth checking out. And hey, if you like what you're hearing, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel for more. Alright, let's talk about the fourth ETF on our list, the Invesco QQQ Trust. This one's all about the tech game, tracking the Nasdaq 100 index, which includes the big shots in technology and innovation. More than half of this fund is made up of tech and innovation-focused companies, with retail trade and healthcare following behind. When you check out the top 10 companies in this ETF, you'll find familiar names like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, and Alphabet. Now, here's the deal, this ETF is a bit different from the previous ones we talked about. It's not as diverse because it really hones in on high-tech companies. That means when things are going well, they're flying high, but when times are tough, they can hit rock bottom. So, it's like a roller coaster of performance. Right now, QQQ is trading around $366.36, and it's been on fire this year with over 37% growth. In the past, it's had solid one-year growth at 25%, over 16% in 5 years, and a 10-year growth of 18.63%. Now, let's tackle the question of affordability. You don't always need to buy a whole share of an ETF or stock. Many brokers allow you to buy fractions, like buying a piece of a pizza instead of the whole pie. And hey, if you're enjoying this info, don't forget to give that like button a tap and consider subscribing for more insights. Let's dive into the fifth ETF on our list, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. Think of this one as a cousin to the Invesco RSP we talked about earlier, but with a slight twist. Instead of getting all fancy with equal weights, VOO aims to match the performance of the S&P 500 index as closely as possible. It's like hitching a ride on the top 500 companies' success train, and these are the big players that have been around the block and have a solid track record. As of now, VOO is trading around $402.95, and it's been doing pretty darn well. It scored over 16% growth year-to-date, over 19% in the past year, around 12% in 5 years, and a 10-year growth of about 12.82%. But here's the kicker, the expense ratio is just 0.03%, which means you're only forking over $3 in fees for every $10,000 you invest. That's like pocket change. I like to think of VOO as the core ETF. It's like the trusty foundation of your investment portfolio that makes sense for almost everyone to have. There's really not much to gripe about here, solid performance and super low expenses. It's a keeper. Alright folks, let's dig into the sixth ETF on our list, the Vanguard Information Technology ETF, or VGT. This one is like a focused tech powerhouse, and it's all about keeping up with the MSCI, US Information Technology Index. Now, when it comes to mimicking the index, VGT takes it seriously. It uses a full replication strategy, which means it tries to hold all the stocks in the index in the same proportions. If rules get in the way, it gets creative with a sampling approach to get as close as possible. This ETF's sweet spot is the tech sector. We're talking companies dealing in computers, internet stuff, and all things tech-related. From system wizards to software creators and tech hardware pros, it's all here. Peek at the lineup, and you'll spot the usual suspects like Apple and Microsoft. But there are also some other tech players like Oracle, AMD, Adobe, and Salesforce in the mix. Right now, VGT is trading at around $437.21. It's been on fire with over 39% growth year-to-date, 36% in the past year, about 20% in 5 years, and a strong 21% growth over a decade. And the cherry on top, the expense ratio is a reasonable 0.1%, meaning you're dishing out just $10 in fees for every $10,000 you put in. In my book, this ETF is a clear winner. It's tech-focused, it's got fantastic long-term performance, and those expenses won't break the bank. If you're tech-savvy or even just tech-curious, this might be right up your alley. And hey, if you're liking what you're hearing, toss that thumbs up my way and consider subscribing for more investment chats. Let's dive into the seventh ETF on our list, the Vanguard International Dividend Appreciation ETF, known as VIGI. This one is like your global diversification buddy, designed to match the moves of the S&P Global Dividend Growers Index. Now, here's the cool part, VIGI is like your international safety net. It helps protect your investments from wobbles that might be specific to the US market. It's like adding an extra layer of financial armor. When you peek at where this ETF is invested, a big chunk, about 75%, is hanging out in Europe and the Pacific region. By the way, that Pacific bit includes countries like Japan and New Zealand. As for the companies in the mix, you'll see a mix of familiar and not so familiar names, like Sony, Nestlé, SAP, Novo Nordisk, and Novartis. Right now, VIGI is trading at around $73.69. It's been showing a steady performance, with over 9% growth year-to-date, about 11% over a year, and more than 6% over 5 years. Now, this isn't your turbocharged growth rocket. It's more like your steady Eddie kind of deal. Think consistent returns in a diverse market. Plus, it throws in a nice dividend yield of around 2.5%. So, it's all about that balanced, reliable approach. And guess what? The expense ratio is pretty decent at 0.15%. That's like paying $15 in fees for every $10,000 you put in. To sum it up, VIGI is your go-to if you're looking for dependable international exposure with a sprinkle of dividends on top. If that sounds like your kind of investment flavor, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing for more investment insights. Alright, let's dive into the next ETF on our list, the VanEck Semiconductor. Just like the others, this fund is managed in a hands-off way, tracking the semiconductor sector index. The goal here is to copy the index's moves as closely as possible. Now, let's talk semiconductors. These little chips are like the secret sauce behind all our gadgets, from CPUs to GPUs and even simple transistors. As our hunger for supercharged electronics grows, the demand for these chips keeps on rising. Speaking of electronics, that reminds me, when do you think it's a good age for my daughter to have her own cell phone? Drop your wisdom in the comments, seriously, I'd love to hear. Okay, back to business. This ETF stands out because of its mix of companies. You've got players like ASML Holdings, TI, Intel, AMD, Broadcom, Nvidia, and TSMC. It's like the Avengers of the semiconductor world. Right now, SMH is trading around $150.36. It's been on a roll, with over 46% growth this year, 45% over a year, 24% over 5 years, and more than 24% over a decade. That's some pretty solid performance, but remember, it does focus heavily on semiconductors, so there's a tad more risk. Now, when it comes to expenses, this one's a little pricier, with an expense ratio of 0.35%. That's like $35 for every $10,000 you invest. But considering it's been dishing out over 24% returns over a decade, it's not too shabby. Even though it might not be the talk of the town, I see it as a hidden gem. If you're looking to spice up your portfolio with growth potential, this one's worth a closer look.